Welcome to the April meeting of the Australian Zonta Says Now think tank, and thank you for making time to be with us today. My name is Carol Theobald, and I am speaking to you today from the lands of the Whadjuk Noongar people in Western Australia. I'll be hosting today's meeting with the help of Sue Lees and Sandra Burns in Victoria, Bernadine Guy and Cheryl Scott in New South Wales, and Bridget Mather in South Australia. Today we'll be talking to a couple of Australian high flyers who are at the forefront internationally and locally creating our climate future. This photo is of one of the world's highest flying birds, a crane that can fly over 33,000 feet. Wouldn't it be great if we could fly like cranes and we wouldn't need aircraft? Anyway, firstly, I'd like to cover some housekeeping, say hi in the chat and tell us where you're calling from today. Please use the chat line to make comments, keep your microphone on mute, ask short, succinct questions, and use welcoming and inclusive language. This is our programme for today, and as you can see, we've got two guest speakers, so let's get right into it. I'll now hand over to Bernadine for our welcome and introduction.
Thanks, Carol. First, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands in all the places we meet today, and pay our respects to their elders past and present and emerging. At each meeting, we like to put the spotlight on a First Nations woman who is making a difference in the community. Today, we honour Yana Cedar, Principal of Cedar Consultancy Enterprises. Yana's recent Facebook post showed her excitement about being selected to join the Australian delegation at CSW 70. That's the Commission for the Status of Women meeting held at the United Nations in New York. Yana is a Nepali and a Yinji Bandi woman from the Pilbara region of WA. She has worked for over 25 years to overcome barriers to Indigenous women's leadership in the business community of Australia. As she puts it, justice must be shaped with the people whose lives are most affected by it. As a Black angel investor, she invests in Indigenous businesses, and as a consultant and chair of the First Nations X, she works to improve their success. Check out her moving TED Talk where she shares how she walks in two worlds. Congratulations, Yana, and thank you for all that you do for equality. Here is a short 30-second segment of Antonio Guterres' opening address at CSW 70, showing that climate justice and gender justice go hand in hand.
Fifth, justice is essential for climate action. Women and girls, especially in rural and marginalized communities, bear the brunt of climate devastation. When laws deny women equal rights to land, water, resources, and environmental decision-making, climate resilience collapses. But when women lead, when they help design adaptation strategies, safeguard ecosystems, and shape climate policy, responses become more just and more effective. Climate justice and gender justice go hand in hand.
Since our last think tank in February, we have seen the start of the Iran war. The headlines are scary, so we'd like to do two quick polls on how you are feeling. Poll 1. In a world increasingly defined by conflict, what do you think most threatens Australians' futures for women and girls? Climate crisis, geopolitical instability and war, economic inequality, and the cost of living. All of the above as they are interconnected. Please select one answer. Not surprising, I suppose.
Can you all see the results?
Yes.
Yes, good. Okay. I'll stop that.
Thank you. I'd now hand over to Sue Lees to introduce our first speaker.
Thanks, Bernie. Kate Thwaites is the federal member for Jagajaga and the Special Envoy for Climate Change, Adaptation and Resilience. A passionate advocate for working families, gender equity and a sustainable economy. Kate has been a consistent voice in Parliament for the communities most vulnerable to climate impacts and for the policies that build a resilient, renewable Australia. Kate understands that the transition to clean energy must be a just transition, one that creates good jobs, protects the most vulnerable, and leaves no one behind. Please welcome Kate.
Well, thank you, Sue, and thank you all. It's a real pleasure to be joining you. I do want to say particular thanks to Sue, who in our community here in Jagajaga is a champion for both climate, environment and for women. So it's wonderful to be able to join you. I'm joining from the land of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people today, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. It's so great that you're having this focus on empowering women and particularly on empowering women when it comes to how we are adapting and becoming more resilient to the impacts of climate change. I don't need to tell any of you that women are disproportionately impacted by climate change, that it exacerbates existing gender inequalities and poverty, and that UN Women has estimated 158 million more women and girls will potentially be pushed into poverty as a result of climate change by 2050. Now that is a lot. It means there's a lot of work that we need to do. And that's why it's a real privilege for me to be currently serving as a member of the Albanese government as a special envoy for climate change, adaptation and resilience at what is, I think, a really crucial and important time when it comes to tackling climate change here, but also right around the world. One of the things I do regularly as Special Envoy for Climate Change, Adaptation and Resilience is to meet with people from the Pacific in our region, already very impacted by climate change. And I meet with a number of women from the Pacific as well. Last year, I met with a group which included a young artist, Debbie Schutz. And Debbie shared the experience of women in the Marshall Islands, where climate change has impacted the availability of the materials they've traditionally used for jewellery making. And that was jewellery that had enabled women to participate in the economy. By selling their goods, they were directly contributing to their household incomes. Debbie in our meeting told me that because they were no longer able to make these goods, the women were experiencing both the stress of having a reduced household income and also an increase in domestic tensions because they were no longer contributing to the family economy and an increase, sadly, in gender-based violence. This isn't something specific to the Marshall Islands. We know that across the world, as insecurity amplifies as a result of climate change, gender-based violence increases. At the end of our meeting, Debbie gave me a print of one of her artworks, and this artwork still makes me quite emotional. It was of a woman standing strong in the middle of rising waters, steadfast as she faced the oncoming threat. I have that artwork hanging in my Parliament House office, not where I am here today in Melbourne, but in Canberra. And it serves as a reminder for me that both things can be true, that women can and will be disproportionately impacted by climate change, but also that women can and will be at the centre of our efforts, both to combat climate change and to show resilience as we go through it. As I said, people in the Pacific Islands are already experiencing high temperatures, shifts in rainfall patterns, rising sea levels, and more frequent and severe disasters. So it is very important that as the Pacific's neighbour, Australia is part of combating climate change and that we are united in how we do this. And certainly from an Australian government perspective, this is something over the past year that we have been very focused on during our bid to host COP31. Now, as probably most of you know, we ultimately were not successful in hosting COP31. That is going to be Turkey. But we were successful in taking the position of President of Negotiations, which our Energy and Climate Minister, Chris Bowen, now has. And so that means there's still a lot of work happening here in the Pacific. Last month, I attended the Pacific Leaders Climate Talanoa in Brisbane with a number of delegates from the Pacific Islands, where we talked about what our priorities in the lead up to COP31 were going to be. We'll be bringing the world to Fiji and to Tuvalu for the pre-COP ahead of November's conference in Turkey. And as part of this process, we're also looking at how we make sure that we engage with women in the Pacific so that their voices are heard through the COP process. Here in Australia, I know that right across the country, Australians are experiencing the impacts of a changing climate. That happens in workplaces, It's happening in our communities in cities and in regional areas. It's happening in remote communities. And we do know, as I said, that impact is being felt now, but also that it has the potential to get worse. We also know that First Nations communities are already being disproportionately impacted. Last year, our government released our first National Climate Risk Assessment, which actually for the first time gave us that national look at what's happening now, but also what the risks are as we go forward. If you haven't had the chance to see it, it is worth having a look at that assessment. It does provide us with a sobering outlook on what we as a country are currently experiencing, but also what we are facing. We are seeing more storms, more heat waves, more extreme weather events, and these are increasingly impacting the economy. The total economic cost of natural disasters is growing and expected to reach $39 billion per year by 2050. So these are not facts in isolation. Obviously, these are facts that we need to act on, and as a government, we are acting. At the same time that we released the risk assessment, we also released our National Adaptation Plan, providing a roadmap for investment and focus as how we help Australian communities to deal with the very real impacts of climate change. And of course, we're also committed to reducing emissions, committed to net zero by 2050. And I think we are beginning to see the transformations that will get us to that target. And at the start of our talk today, you referenced the war in the Middle East and the very real headlines and impacts that are coming from that. And at a time when the global energy supply is being interrupted, I think there is a fact that becomes even more relevant, which is that the Australian sun cannot be interrupted by war. The clean energy transition is more urgent than ever before. More renewables provide Australia with the potential for cleaner power and cheaper power bills, but also for the potential for increased sovereignty over our power supplies. And I'm really heartened that it's increasingly apparent that Australians see this potential. It's not just the government. Since July last year, 300,000 Australian households and businesses have installed batteries through our government's Cheaper Home Battery Scheme. In Australia, we now have the highest take-up of rooftop solar in the world. We've seen a 12% increase in the number of EVs on the road in the past decade. And in March, I'm sure no doubt spurred on by fuel supply concern, we saw record demand of 14.6% of market share. So the unprecedented crisis overseas has led to an increased demand for second-hand EVs. And we also know that a successful second-hand market will make EVs affordable, lowering the entry barrier for buyers. What's also interesting in this transformation is while I think a number of the people involved in it are driven by climate concerns, a lot of people are driven by the reality of what they see around them and by cost pressures. And so again, we see this movement towards renewables, which increasingly become a more secure, reliable and cheaper option for Australians. As a government, we don't expect to get there without effort and without investment, and we are investing $75 billion in net zero programs. So this investment is not only delivering lower emissions, it's also easing the economic and social transition to clean energy, creating new jobs and opportunities, particularly for young people entering the workforce. Again, we have the opportunity here in Australia to grow new jobs, new industries connected to the clean energy economy. So we've established the New Energy Apprenticeship Scheme, which supports trades workers in becoming skilled in clean energy technology. We're investing $50 million to upgrade TAFE campuses across the country, building EV-specific workshops and wind turbine maintenance facilities. And we're also spending $60 million to increase women's participation in these trades because, again, the benefits of the transformation to come need to flow to women as well as to men. We're doing this across the board to help our efforts to drive gender equality across our economy. We're among 13 countries in the Equality in Energy Transitions Initiative, which advances clean energy by increasing women's participation and closing the gender pay gap. We're implementing the Equal by 30 programs, which are designed to bring public and private sectors together with an aim to achieve equal pay, equal leadership, and equal opportunities across the clean energy sector. And in this program, we've established the Gender Equity in Energy Roundtable. We're building a Women in Energy Resources Hub, and we've expanded women's engagement in local and international forums. And again, that's because we see that women have the potential both to benefit from this change, but also to help us to drive it. And for me, it is really key how many women are driving the transformation across our country, but also in our communities. I regularly meet with women who are passionate both about what needs to do and needs to be done, but also who are telling me about some of the amazing work that they have underway. And I think even the fact that so many of you have decided to spend your Saturday afternoon on this Zoom call shows us how women's leadership is important in this space. And I know there's a lot of reasons why Australian women are passionate about climate change, and people have their different reasons for that. I'm also interested, though, in how we continue to harness that leadership and women's potential in this space to make sure that we are continuing to push in the right direction. Because, of course, in the role I'm in, I'm also aware that progress isn't linear and it's not guaranteed. The politics of climate change in this country has not been smooth. When we came to office 2 terms ago, we were in a position where Australia was lagging behind on climate action. We'd had 9 years of inaction, and in fact, people in power who really didn't acknowledge that climate change was a real threat to Australia. Now, I can't pretend that threat has gone away altogether. At the moment, you only have to look at the published opinion polls around the rise of One Nation, a party whose leader is accepting free plane rides from mining magnates while spruiking coal and labelling climate change as a hoax. This is still a reality of the political landscape in Australia. So I am always conscious about how we are harnessing community support and building community support to make sure that we continue to be able to get the climate work we need and that we can continue the momentum we are building for this transition. And again, I think this is an area where women's leadership is particularly important, where women's voices can be trusted voices in communities where we do need to continue to push ahead with change and to bring people with us. And so I don't want to be pessimistic about the future. I do have the privilege of seeing firsthand the efforts that are being made by government, the investments that are being made by the private sector, the work that is being done in communities. And while there is still so much more to be done, I do think that as we work towards the global goal of net zero by 2050, there is potential for us to steam ahead, actually, and to do it by bringing our communities with us. I think each one of you on this call is playing a crucial role, bringing your passion, bringing your perspectives, and I know your work in your communities together as we continue this ambitious action. My plea to all of you today would to be, don't stop doing this work. This transformation is not something that government can do alone. It is something that we need all of you and your leadership to complete. So, as I said, it's a real pleasure and privilege for me to have joined you today. And I hope that you can continue to do the great work that you're doing to help us through this climate transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. That was very clear and helpful. I'm going to start by asking one question, and I know Bridget, who's the chair of Zonta Australia, wants to ask one, and then I'll open it to the floor. So my question is something that a lot of us are just a bit concerned about at the moment. So with the geopolitical instability, the situation in Iran, etc., dominating global attention, there is a risk that climate commitments get deprioritised. How do you hold the line on Australia's climate obligations in this environment?
Yeah, it's a really important question, and I did touch on this in the speech. I think there's 2 things that can be true here. One is there's a risk because in any time where we face threats or more immediate threats, I think change becomes harder and people become more afraid of change. but the other is the opportunity. And again, as I said, there is an opportunity at the moment where we have actually in Australia, our access to renewable energy is a real strength for us. And it is something that we can harness to make us more resilient and more energy secure. Now, as I said, that's not necessarily an easy pathway, but it is a pathway that as a government we're continuing to invest in, and that we're looking to partner with other countries around the world in as well. And I think, again, this is sort of the global piece at the moment that, again, around the world, countries are looking at, okay, well, what makes us more energy secure? And for other countries as well, that pathway now will probably look different than it did before this conflict. I think what's also hard sometimes in this is the transformation takes time. You know, building the scale of energy infrastructure that is needed does take investment and some years to complete. And so it can be frustrating, I think, also while we wait to get there, because there are still energy needs that need to be met, and some of those will continue to be met by fossil fuels.
Thanks, Kate. I'm going to hand over to Bridget.
Thanks, Sue. Thank you, Minister. That was a great presentation. And it reinforces why we're so delighted that you're representing Australia at Women Deliver. You've demonstrated your credentials in gender and climate justice, and it's well known, so thank you for that. But I wanted to touch a little bit on Minister Bowen as the chief negotiator for COP31. And I suppose we see as a group that his personal understanding of gender justice is inseparable from climate justice, and that's critical in a way, and it could also be transformative. I suppose we are concerned that at COP34 being in Turkey, a country that ranks last in Europe and 135th globally on the World Economic Gender Inequality Index, it's a time of backlash against women's rights, as we've touched on earlier today. The symbolism of that setting is impossible for us to ignore. So we're wondering, is there a way that Zonta can help create a moment for Minister Bowen, perhaps a briefing before Women Deliver, or in your, I suppose, relationship with Minister Bowen, how would you see Zonta assisting in making sure, and look, I'm not assuming that he doesn't understand the connection between gender justice and climate, but I suppose it's just so critical that in the negotiations with Turkey, which has such a poor record, that shines through in all of the conversations. Do you have sort of some insights onto that?
Yeah, thank you, Bridget. A few things. Firstly, yes, I would say, I'm confident that Minister Bowen is very aware of the connection between gender and progress on climate action, and also the impact that climate change is having on women. So I don't think in his work that is forgotten. I think, again, it is something that in the discussions we are having, particularly in the Pacific, that comes through as well, and that we are looking at how we channel into that work. And then in terms of the work that Turkey is advancing as well, we are working constructively with Turkey. It's not the situation where we're sort of trying to go out there and say, here's all these ambitious things, and Turkey is pushing back and saying, no, it will just be this. That's not the nature of the relationship, or I think the COP that Turkey is trying to set up. I appreciate the offer of Zonta's assistance, and I think perhaps what I can do coming out of this meeting is making sure that we're connecting you as well to some of the people in our relevant departments who are doing this work, and having these conversations and bringing people together, so that we can make sure that you're helping to inform where we get to as well. Again, the realities of COPs is, I think, they can be all-encompassing, they can be quite focused. My sense is broadly where it seems like the COP process broadly is moving, and I think this was the case in Brazil last year as well, is that while the negotiated text is still very important, and the agreements around negotiated text and the nationally determined contributions, which are those commitments that countries are making to how they're going to reduce emissions under the Paris Agreement, all remain crucial. A lot of the agenda now is also coming through what's talked about as the action agenda, which isn't formal negotiations. It's not part of the agreement that is signed on, but does go to, again, how a lot of countries are seeing that transition in energy in their own countries and sharing experiences in that space as well.
Thank you for that. I suppose just coming back from CSW and seeing how quickly things are unraveling, and I will pick on the United States, who actively participated in CSW, but from a negative mindset, and how quickly things could unravel if we're not really careful. And I'm also conscious that even with the G20 this year being held in the United States, there are no advisory panels apart from an economic one. So there's no women's gender advisory group at all in the discussion panels. So it's just such a critical issue at the moment, and you can see that women's equality is just going, or has the potential to go backwards at the rate of knots. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Bridget.
So, Carol, can we take a couple of questions?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. All right, I'll open up for questions. If we could get people to raise their hand, either their hand or the computer. And if I might get Carol and Sandra to help me just to note people who want to talk. Okay, so is there anybody who'd like to say anything? I actually can't see the
Well, I've got a question.
Carol's there.
Carol's got one.
I just have one question. I know that at the end of April, there's that conference being held in Colombia about the Ending Fossil Fuel Treaty, and there's about 45 countries, I think, on board with that at the moment. Is that something that Australia's looking at as a transition eventually, joining that?
Well, Australia's been involved in those discussions. Obviously, again, travel is somewhat difficult at the moment, or more difficult than it had been. But yes, broadly, you know, these are discussions that are happening as part of the broader COP process. And again, our trajectory to net zero does take us away from fossil fuels and into renewables.
Yeah.
Susan Westcott's got her hand up.
Okay, Susan.
Hello, Minister. Thank you for your presentation. I enjoyed it very much. I've had 2 EVs in my life now at the age of 74. It's been a challenge, but also I feel a lot safer. So the safety aspect for older people driving EVs, it's almost impossible to have an accident in one unless you're really, really attentive. So that is one point I wanted to make, given your other portfolio. But the importance of the transition is heightened by this war for people going around looking for EVs and trying to work out how they work and getting safe with the whole idea of buying one. You know, I bought 2 now at auction, and both under $30,000, and it's been absolutely marvellous since 2019. So I sing this song quite loudly in Tasmania, but the infrastructure isn't yet there, and regional areas such as the one I live in is certainly in need of more support through the councils. And I'm wondering if the government can actually secure electricity prices as they are at the moment, because as people are transitioning to try and do the right thing to EVs, we don't seem to have a sense of security that the price of electricity isn't going to skyrocket too.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you for sharing your experience as well. Interesting to hear that you bought your 2 at auction. That does say that there is a second-hand market there for EVs. And yes, as an EV driver myself, I'm aware that I think the infrastructure's got better. I've been driving my EV for probably about 2 years now, and I think in that time, certainly the charging infrastructure I think is better than it was, but increasingly as we have more people invest in EVs, we will need more charging infrastructure. And this is something the government is investing in together with state and local governments, as well as trying to work with the private sector on. When it comes to electricity prices, really the best thing we can do for electricity prices is to get more renewables into the system. And so what we have seen in the data that has been coming to us, I think particularly over the past year, is that what is driving down prices is the increase in renewables. And that includes what I was talking about in terms of that household transformation of solar and batteries. And in the future, it may include your EV being a vehicle to grid rather than just charging. You'll use your car battery as to power your house. So that is really the way that we will see electricity prices come down. Now, as I said, it is still complex. There is still a lot to do in that space, but we are again seeing movement. As a Victorian, as a Melburnian, those of you who are joining from Melbourne would remember that in January we had one of those heat spells that we quite often have in Victoria, and we had some very serious bushfires at that time. Now, what we did not have for the first time in my memory was load shedding. So we did not have the state government instructing industry to turn off. We did not have them saying to us, nope, you can't turn your air conditioners on. There were power outages, but they were as a result of poles and wires going down. And so that does show you the difference that mix we are starting to get from having more renewables in the system is playing both on reliability, supply, and also on cost. So that's really where we need to continue to forge ahead.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else who's got a question? Otherwise, I'll close. Okay, thank you. So, Kate, we just want to say thank you so much for today, and not just for your time, but for the conviction you bring to your work every day. And I've seen it over the years, and people are certainly seeing it today. You have reminded us that climate action is not just environmental policy, it's economic policy, it's social policy, and absolutely gender policy. So Zontians across Australia look forward to working with you in the future. And everybody, please join me in thanking Kate today for giving up your your very precious Saturday afternoon.
Thank you all. It was a real pleasure to join you. Thanks.
Thank you.
But if you can stay to listen to a bit more, that would be great. But we understand if you can't.
Thanks.
All right. So now I am going to hand over to Sandra.
Thanks, Sue. That was terrific. If Kate shows us what leadership looks like in Parliament, our next speaker shows us what leadership looks like on the ground, in the bins, in the warehouses and the workplaces of Melbourne. Sally Quinn, a former social worker, is the founder of the CEO of Green Collect, a social enterprise that has reimagined what we throw away. And I was delighted to meet Sally recently, and she came to our club to speak to us about this. You'll be impressed. Green Collect diverts waste from landfills, it reduces carbon emissions, and crucially, it creates inclusive employment pathways for people who face significant barriers to work. Sally's model proves that the circular economy is not just good for the planet, it's good for people as well. It's no surprise that she is Zonta District 23's 2025 Women Taking Climate Action Award winner. So please welcome Sally Quinn.
Thank you, everyone. It's lovely to be here. And I was thrilled to be acknowledged for my work through the award. And it was great to meet people in person a couple of months ago. So I do have some slides to share. I'll share my screen in a moment, just because I'm going to be talking about some theories that are probably more easily understood when you can kind of see some models in action. And I was really interested to hear Minister Thwaites talk about the government's priority and action in relation to the climate crisis. And I guess what I'll be talking about is some community-based action, I guess, some grassroots action, but also as I talk about the social enterprise model, I'm going to be talking about the role business can play. So we know that business shapes a lot of what we buy, what we consume, a lot of how our economy works and how wealth is distributed. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the social enterprise model as one that actually works for justice in a different way by challenging mainstream business practices, by really creating a vision and challenge to business to see themselves as corporate citizens, as actors who can significantly use their influence to bring about better social outcomes and also better environmental outcomes. So Green Collect is a social enterprise. There are around 20,000 social enterprises across Australia, contributing over $21 billion to the economy, employing about 1.6% of the entire workforce. So social enterprises aren't a small movement. They are a growing movement, partly because of this challenge from consumers saying we don't want to invest or have shares in companies that are doing the wrong thing. Consumers, we can show what we believe in the world we want by what we buy. So we are active participants in shaping where money flows. Does it go to big multinational companies that are exploiting the earth? Or do we choose to spend our money in ways that promote regenerative purposes? So there's a really interesting role for business, and social enterprises are businesses that trade like other businesses, but they're driven for a primary social or environmental purpose. So it is about making money, but the money is reinvested back into a social or environmental purpose. Money isn't the driver, money is the enabler, and there's all sorts of governance processes and accreditations for social enterprises that really give us confidence that social enterprises do what they say they'll do and are not compromising on social and environmental outcomes for profits, which generally most businesses do if they exist for the benefit of shareholders. So social enterprise movement's a really interesting one, and I'll start sharing my screen now.
All right.
Yeah, so if you just go to the second slide, that I think it's actually just some photos of our enterprise, but I suppose it puts some visuals into people's minds. I'm going to talk a little bit about how Green Collect started. It's an interesting story, and it's one I tell because our startup community is very important. People starting businesses, especially young people. I have a lot to do with universities, and a lot of young people who are studying business or are thinking about being involved in commerce are largely thinking about the environment. Our young people have grown up knowing about the environment, being aware of the threat, but also hopefully solutions. And so it's really, I do a lot around mentoring, particularly young women starting enterprises, to consider social enterprise and environmental sustainability being either the focus of the business or at least woven deeply into the operations of the business. So the photo down the bottom on the right, where there's some women sitting down, that is a photo of me in my first social work job. And I worked in the homelessness sector. I worked in the delivery of crisis housing and then moved into more policy areas. But that work really influenced me very strongly because I was working with women who were often homeless because of family violence. And back in the late 90s, we didn't have the same legislation and protections in place that meant that women actually can usually be supported and prioritise to stay in the family home. That wasn't the case back in the late 90s and earlier, when we saw the refuge movement and, a lot of safe places for women who had to flee their own homes. So I was working with women who largely had been in those situations. And one of the things that really became apparent to me was that employment was an underused lever in helping people move out of homelessness. Employment is a lever for a lot of social problems facing people. And so this notion of what a job meant, and I think all of us who have had employment and good employment know the value of a good and secure job, especially if you're doing something you believe in, but probably also know how challenging it is when you're in a work environment that isn't supportive, or that is you feel at odds with the purposes of the workplace you're in. So this thought that employment was important for women, and the quickest way out of homelessness, actually, given that priority housing lists are 10 plus years, women were saying, I want a job, I need to get a job. That's how I can have the biggest and more immediate change in my situation. So I started working with a lot of women to find employment, and discovered that it is very hard for people to get a job when they don't have a fixed address. And it's almost impossible to get a fixed address and secure housing when you don't have a job. And I guess the other part of that is that there just are very few workplaces set up for people who are in a crisis situation, who need support, flexibility, whether it's to attend appointments or court appearances, or to manage mental health or other challenging things. Workplaces are just not set up for people who are really in a tough spot. So when I finished that work, I was actually pregnant with my first child in that photo. I thought, when I go back to work, I want to have an impact. I want to put my time and energy into something that looks at where systems could be different. So I had this dream of starting a workplace to provide employment for the women, the sorts of women who I had worked with. So I had an amazing opportunity through some study I was doing to work with BP, who wanted to fund a think tank that would start to think about social and environmental objectives coming together. So triple bottom line, can something truly work for environmental, social and financial benefit? And can those things be truly valued, and can they actually strengthen each other? So through that work, we got some funding to start Green Collect. And so now Green Collect, we employ about 70 to 80 people each year. The majority of staff have come from difficult backgrounds. At least half of the workforce is women, and 80% of the leadership is women. So we are really challenging mainstream waste services that are not only managed and run generally by men, they are run in very masculine ways around big volumes, big trucks, very unimaginative ways, with a lot of lack of care for the actual items that are at their end of use. So maybe the next slide, Carol, talks just a bit about the structure of Green Collect. So we set out to do something for putting people and planet together. So when we were thinking about, well, what sort of business would we run? There was a real sense of care for the environment that just personally was very present, but also we did some brainstorming about, well, what is your ideal job? What if we're thinking about job creation, let's not make them poor quality jobs, let's make them high quality jobs. And so when you think about high quality employment, it's having a sense of agency, that your work, your time, your skills matter, and are contributing to something bigger. So that's where the idea of working for environmental sustainability really took hold. And what I've observed since then is, and I think there was maybe the woman who, the Indigenous woman who runs the consultancy, sorry, I've forgotten her name, but saying that the people most affected by a problem, when they're part of the solution, obviously, they can contribute ideas that are very real, but also there's a strong motivation and a sense of agency that comes from taking action. So what we see when people are employed at Green Collect, that they're contributing to a better world. There's a sense of where they've been disempowered in life and had a lack of power, that it's a very healing and transforming thing to then be paid to do work that is actually making the world a better place. So that sense of agency really comes about through that people and planet combination. So we're a non-profit organisation, which means we're actually a registered charity, but we trade. And so the money that we trade through the business pays all of our costs and it is reinvested back into the enterprise. Sorry, I can just see that I'm actually on holidays at the moment. Sorry, so I'm not in my normal place and I haven't got a charger that's going to stretch far enough. I'll just hold my laptop here. So as a result, I guess after doing this work for 20 years, Green Collect is both a pioneer and a leader in the social enterprise sector, but also in the circular economy space. So circular economy is talking about how the goods and services and products that we use don't lose value as they're used, but as they're used, they are kept in value and kept in circulation. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the frameworks there. Green Collect works with about 300 businesses each year. Most state government departments in Victoria use our services. We work with businesses and we work with local government to provide new solutions for complex forms of waste that can't go into regular waste streams. The green jobs, Minister Thwaites talked about, the green economy and the opportunity for young people and skilling up. So when we see the opportunity for the growth in green economy, we want to make sure some of the words that guide our challenge is that it needs to be a safe and just transition, and that this transition to green economy holds the opportunity to put young people and skilling up work, including those who are affected most by the problem, but also people who've been distanced from the workplace. This is an amazing opportunity. So Green Collect actually worked with the Victorian government to start the first TAFE units in circular economy as part of that investment into TAFE. What are the skills of circular economy? They had never been really named and validated. And so Green Collect was able to put that curriculum together for TAFE. So there's some things, I guess, that Green Collect does that are distinct about our business as usual, but we're part of discussions and broader systems change around circular economy, training, and the social enterprise sector as well. So now I'm going to move into looking at donor economics. I think it's a really interesting framework, and I think people may have heard of Kate Rayworth's work. She started putting this concept together, which looked at, we can't look at our ecological and climate environmental issues without considering people, and that we need to have a safe and place where the needs of the planet are considered, but also the needs of people, and that those things can work together. So if we go on to the next slide, there's a few words here, but it is worth just really kind of having a good understanding of what the donut looks like. So the green donut space is the safe and just space for humanity. So the outer circle talks about the ecological ceiling. So once we start moving into the red outside that, it means we're using resources and degrading the planet and living unsustainably. Essentially, the world will not cope. So there's a whole lot of things in there around ocean acidification and ozone layer, biodiversity loss, land clearing, all sorts of things. Oh yes, you've just got onto the next one, which shows those particular aspects of environmental health around the outside. And then on the inside is the social foundation, making sure that people are able to thrive too. And the Sustainable Development Goals were used in shaping the inner ring, which talks about people need access to good health, education, income and work. They need safe housing. They need, there needs to be gender equality. So these goals and objectives are ones that we need to focus on and measure our progress on to ensure we're moving in the direction of people moving out, so that there's less people in the centre of the donut where they are missing out on life's essentials and unable to thrive, and that we're bringing people into that safe space where people can thrive and have a healthy life, while at the same time making sure we're bringing our environmental impact back into a safe and livable place. And a lot of that work is, regenerative. When we've done a lot of damage, we need to regenerate, and we at least need to stop the harm. And obviously, when we think about renewals or renewable energy, that's a big one in addressing issues like, a range of these. When you think about what mining does to environments and what the system currently looks like. So this is a good slide that shows where the world is. And it's, if you get onto, if you just look up donor economics, you can find, you can type in Australia and you can see our, how we're performing, and it compares different countries, individual measures. But this global kind of picture here shows us that climate change in the red space, we have gone far beyond what the Earth can sustain. And we know that just slight temperature rises in the ocean have devastating impacts for people with rising sea levels, climate refugees. So we know climate change is one of the main ones. Also, the use of fertilizers and how they are damaging soil quality and the increasing toxicity. Then you can look at land conversion. So we're still clearing land, old growth forests. We know that we need trees. We know that we need forests to combat CO2, and then biodiversity loss. So these are major areas where we've overshot, is the term there. And then in the centre, we can see political voice, particularly when you think about what's happening in the world right now, social equity, gender equality. It shows that we are in trouble in a lot of those areas as well. And a lot of these areas are related to climate. So when we know that climate change disproportionately affects women, and so when we have climate change, which is clearly where we're in that red zone, we know that violence against women increases. We know that women are displaced and have their health is more drastically affected, especially maternal health. We know that women have lack of access to resources when there's climate disasters. And so this framework is a really good one because it's one of the first that really shows we have to work on these issues together. So maybe I'll talk a little bit now on the next slide about the role of the circular economy in addressing a lot of these issues. So the way we take things from the earth, the way we then make them, the short use that many things happen. We know about fast fashion. We know about the obsolete nature of how technology is designed. And then the model up until very recently has been that once it's had its first use or come to the end of its use, it then just goes into landfill. I don't know if you grew up in the era where everything would just go into the backyard incinerator, regardless of whether it was plastic or whatever it was. So we had a mindset that you could just take things and that it didn't really matter where you took it from and the impact it had on the environment. And then it would be made in ways that often use a lot of water and energy, exploit people in the meantime. And then use is often, especially in recent times, the use of things we buy is so short. And if you're buying an $8 toaster from Kmart, when it breaks, you're probably not thinking about going to have it mended. So the way the economy works doesn't support longevity of use or reuse. And then things just go into landfill. And actually, the rates of resource capture are actually worse, are going in the wrong direction at the moment. So while we know better, we're not practicing better. So the circular economy, in contrast, if you look at the first one at the top at sort of 12 o'clock there, take, is saying, well, hopefully what we're using in the first place is coming from a renewable source. So whether it's a forest plantation or whether it's something that already exists, say you need a toaster and you can buy a toaster off Facebook Marketplace or wherever, you might be actually be in the taking, actually not putting pressure on production. Things are being made better. Well, we need things to be made better, designed not for obsolescence, designed with quality, designed and made with recycled content. We need to use things longer. So this is a really important one in terms of the right to repair and the support for whether it's refurbishing something, repurposing something, things that actions we can take that make things last longer, whether it's sewing a hole in a top or whether it's having your phone repaired, or there are many ways we can use things for longer. Then when we have finished the first use of something, this recapturing the value is about it not going to landfill or it not coming to the end of its life. But there are 10 R's. I'm going to talk about those 10 R's because this is what Green Collect does in practice. So it does look like a very complex diagram, and I'll talk you through it in a way. And why I think it's important to give these examples is unless we have things in practice that show another way, these things just stay as theories or they stay in a sort of high level zone. Whereas when we practice another way, behaviours change, mindsets change, and we start to engage in something like the circular economy in a very real way rather than seeing it as just a theory. The other thing is, as we practice different ways, we prove and validate things that then can be used as demonstrations for the sorts of things we need to invest in. So for Green Collect, we're place-based, we're in Melbourne, but what is quite significant about it, Green Collect, is that it can be pointed towards as these are the sort of future-facing businesses we need. This is an example that it can be done, and this is how these models look. So while Green Collect is, reasonably small, what it does is give a very real picture of how we can build businesses to be different, treat people differently, and I guess in terms of donut economics, this is what it could look like in a place. So if you go to the left part where there's a picture of a city, if we just start there, because Green Collect largely collects items from corporates and businesses when they've finished using them. And that's where we saw the gap and a lot of need, where a business just puts everything in landfill, they're moving or they don't need things. And often those things have a lot of value. So Green Collect starts in that zone in the city. Yep. And you can see they've got products that have entered the end of use. They don't need them anymore. At that point, they could put them in a skip and they could go to landfill, and all of the value is lost and a lot of damage occurs. But at Green Collect, we collect those things, and then they go in. We have some vehicles that bring them to our warehouse. And so at this point, we're looking at every item, and this is where Green Collect really does challenge the traditional waste management companies that deal with things at such a scale, often far from where they were used, with machinery that can't look and take care and think about what is the best outcome for this item. At Green Collect, every item that comes in, and I think last year we processed 90,000 items were recirculated and kept in the circular economy. Each of those 90,000 objects were handled by a person and required a person to care and to consider what is the best environmental outcome? Can this be reused? Can we sell this again in its current format? Does it need some repair? Does it need cleaning? Are the component parts good, but the whole's not good? And could those parts be used and brought back into circulation? So you can see if you go above from the diagram of people, it can go, so this first loop where it goes straight up, and then the products are assessed, cleaned, wiped, ready for reuse. And then there's a picture of a colourful shop. That's one of our shops. And that's indicating that those things are sold and used again. And then at the end of life, they can then come back around. So that loop can be a continuous loop. But it requires the items to be treated differently to a normal waste delivery system. If you go along the bottom where the truck then goes to where the people are, and then there's another arrow that goes up, and this might be this item's broken. No one wants it. It can't be used again. It's too old. There's too many of these things available. A good example of that are folders. We collect around 50,000 folders a year. People don't want to buy a secondhand folder. People don't want to receive a free secondhand folder. So we started looking at the component parts. So there was plastic, there's metal, and there's cardboard. And so we started taking those materials apart, tearing the item down, and then the plastic can be recycled, the metal can be recycled, and the card can be recycled. So then those items would then go up to that top loop, and those things are recycled, and then they're used as secondary raw materials. So rather than resources, virgin resources coming from the natural environment, things are being made with things that already exist. I did skip a little arrow that you can see where that goes before it goes up to recycling. We also make notebooks out of those of the cardboard from inside the folders. So we actually make a new product out of materials and then we sell that. So there's another little loop there that is called repurpose. So if you look at the R's on the right of the screen, these are sort of a hierarchy, and what we're trying to do is use the higher up R's. So the first one that we're talking about at Green Collect, and I think in society in general, is refuse. Do you need that thing? There's probably a high chance you don't need that thing. If you rethink how you could get that thing, could you share it with your neighbour? Could you buy it from a tool library or a library? Then reduce. Can we use less of that thing? But then most of Green Collect's R's are in this resell, reuse, and that's where the job creation is, repairing, refurbishing, remanufacturing, and then recycling is quite low. And recover means actually remining, going to landfills and extracting valuable items like metals. So that's a bit, sorry, I can see a question there. Shall I keep going and save the questions to the end? Yeah, okay. Well, we'll keep going because I think
if you can carry on quickly because we're running out of time, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think the next slide's the last slide. So this is just recapping, and then I'm happy to take questions or comments. So things that are really, that Green Collect's doing in this space that are significant is the representation of women. So there's less than 20% of women in the general waste industry. We have at least 50% in our operational positions. That is challenging gender norms. That is putting women in places of employment that they normally wouldn't have had opportunity. It actually is transforming the waste industry because women do behave differently and think differently about things we observe. And I know in my coming fresh, I never thought I'd be working in the waste industry. So I've come to it with fresh eyes. We're doing things in more sophisticated ways. We're bringing nurture, we're bringing detail into an industry that operated quite differently, and it needs to move in this direction. So ensuring women are at the systems and design end, they're part of the hands-on solutions to climate resilience. A lot of the staff we work with come from refugee backgrounds, and they're refugees because of natural disasters, wars, climate refugees. And so we have a program that the Department of Home Affairs funds where we're working with refugee women. And in the way that we operate our workforce, we're making a work culture that attracts women, that helps women to deal with all of the things that we carry: childcare, caring for aging parents, and menopause. There's a lot of us in that stage of life. So we have a work culture that enables women to work through difficult times. So I guess, without setting out to do this work 25 years ago, it was quite intuitively led, but we really believe that these sorts of solutions like Green Collect are critical to a gender equal climate transition to green industries. That we need to demonstrate, we need to raise visibility of, because they're the businesses of the future that are the ones that are bringing us to within the ecological boundaries we need to operate in, and addressing the issues that women face through employment involvement in climate action. So I might finish there. Hopefully I haven't gone for too long.
Okay, thanks, Sally. I did notice one question was, are you planning to go nationally? So you've obviously created an interest around Australia with some of the people who've connected in today. Carol, do we have time for questions, or do we have to move on?
Just one, because we're running very behind. Yeah.
Okay, well, we have one question from the audience, maybe.
Yeah.
Is there any hands up there?
Sandra, there was one that popped up on the screen while Sally was talking.
Yeah, I can't see them.
I saw something about fertilizers, which I actually don't know a lot about, so I'm not sure if I'm going to be very helpful in that question.
Susan, if you can be quick, please.
That was my question, Sally. It was about uric acid, which is what the farmers are saying, that because of the war we won't have enough for fertilizing, and I constantly using uric acid on my garden, and I know a friend who's using his dog's urine for fixing the balance of fertilizer in his vegetable and herb garden, and mixing it with water, obviously. But it seems to me that the Chinese have been using body waste, human waste, for a very long time to fertilise their crops, and yet Australia hasn't been doing that. And it's a very basic supply that we have, and a big need out there. I'm wondering if we can take this a little bit further and start looking at how we might be able to recycle human waste to assist the farmers.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on that, but I do know that there is a lot of research and a lot of alternatives to chemical-based, whether it's fertilizers or in other forms of production, that there's a challenge when companies hold a lot of control and really actually try to shut down the development of industries that are going to affect their own. And until they start to see that they could adapt their industry, it is hard for new products to become accepted and go through the safety testing and scaling that they need to. So I think a good example of the donut in relation to that is, you could say, well, if we increased, we wanted to have more food supply, let's use chemical-based fertilizers and have a lot more food. But if in creating more food to meet the needs of people, you're actually degrading the environment, that's a good example of where the two need to be in consideration. So I guess when you think about biological solutions to things, they seem like the ones we should be following rather than chemical-based solutions. So it's complex supply chain, and complex to take a product to market as well, for lots of different reasons.
And biochar.
Okay, thank you, Sally. I know we're running out of time. We've got lots of questions there. Someone did ask if they can have your presentation. So if that's okay, Carol will be able to share that if you let her know.
Yeah, I'm very happy to share the presentation and my details. If anyone had a question or was interested, I'm really happy for people to follow up with me individually later.
Okay, thank you, Sally. And Sally is, and your co-founder have built Green Collect, and it's proof that when there's visionary people coming together, backed by courage and hard work, they can genuinely change systems, and that's what we've seen with your work today. You are the embodiment of what Zonta celebrates, women leading with purpose and creating change that lasts. So thank you, Sally. And thank you for sharing your story and challenging us. So please join me in thanking our 2025 District 23 Woman Taking Climate Action winner, Sally Quinn. Thank you, Sally.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed being here. Thank you.
Thank you.
And yes, thank you. Sorry, I know there'll be many questions. I'd now like to hand over to Carol. She's going to let us know what's been happening internationally in Zonta. So thank you.
Thanks, Sandra. And in March, the International Working Group hosted a session online for the NGO CSW 70 Forum it was held in New York. The recording is on our International Think Tank page. The next Intercontinental Think Tank will be on Sunday, the 10th of May at 10 a.m. UTC. That's 8 p.m. at night in Perth. This session will be practical discussion utilising our women and sustainable decision-making resources. And it'll be the last think tank for the biennium, so there'll be a bit of a celebration as well. Some of you may be aware of the conference being held in Colombia at the end of the month. It's the first conference of a group of 45 countries to transition away from fossil fuels. And as you can see, Australia is not among these countries yet. Of course, April is a big month for Zonta Says Now as we focus on our Earth Day campaign in April. Zonta headquarters has come up with 3 activities to add to our Zonta Says Now virtual art gallery. Check out the Earth Day page to learn more about these Earth Day activities. The first one is the Step Forward activity, and you ask members to stand in a row and ask them to take a step forward if they answer yes to one of the questions. See how far across the room they get. We've put together some questions that fit the Australian experience, and these can be downloaded from our Australian think tank page. We did this in our club a couple of days ago and quickly ran out of room. It only took a few minutes, but it was just so much fun. Woke everyone up. I remember the video of Antonio Guterres talking at the beginning of this meeting about climate justice and gender equality being linked. Well, the second activity literally pairs gender equality and climate justice, not with hands, but with feet. You write on one foot why gender equality is important to you, and on the other foot, the impact you want to make on the world to ensure climate justice. And you take a photo of it and send it through to Zonta headquarters. And the third activity is a statement that will be released on Earth Day. And Zonta International is approaching many international organisations to see if they will endorse it. And finally, don't forget to check out the virtual art gallery. It's not too late to submit a submission. The team has sorted the entries, so is happy to take some more. And the 2026 collection will be launched on Earth Day on the 22nd of April. I'd now like to hand over to Bridget to let us know what's been happening in Australia.
Thanks, Carol. I think the key piece of news is that Australia has seen the ratification of the UN High Seas Treaty. I think this has been in the works since about 2023, and this treaty aims to protect about 30% of the world's oceans by 2030. The majority of the oceans are outside any sort of national borders, and it's an area where sometimes there's not a lot happening in terms of environmental protection. So this is a really important piece of legislation. The treaty will create new jobs, stabilise fish stocks, and for the first time, legally mandate gender balance in ocean governance. For women, particularly in our neighbourhood and the Pacific neighbourhood in particular, it also means greater climate resilience and food security in communities. And it probably touches a little bit on the conversation we had with Minister Thwaites as well around COP31. So it is a really important part of legislation that had been missing for a while. What else? The next bit of news is that Cheryl and I went to CSW and we presented similar to Carol. We were there in person, and I have to say that, and Carol, you can talk, Cheryl, you can talk a little bit more about it, but there were 2 things for me around gender justice. There was one that every presentation that I went to talked about the importance of gender justice and the relationship to climate justice. But also there was and that's exhilarating when you're with 5,000 or 6,000 women in particular, all talking about the same thing and wanting the same thing. But it was almost like exhilarating and depressing all in the same statement sometimes, because every group, and I don't think bar one, talked about the diminishing environment around women's rights and how quickly things are starting to unravel, and that it's not by accident. There is an actual coordinated push around the world from some circles to actually diminish women's rights. It's not by accident, it is by design. And so the rhetoric, when we hear how important women's rights are from an economic perspective, we all believe that, but if that's not important to you because probably you're so wealthy that it doesn't matter, then that rhetoric doesn't matter either. So it is a really important time, I think, from women around the world to have an amplified voice. And that was the second part, I think, of all of the presentations, whether inside the UN or outside with the NGOs. And that was around the incredible need for partnerships, because partnerships are the only way we will have an amplified and consistent voice, but also we'll have coordinated and consistent action. And I think there was an overwhelming view that we had to move from advocacy, which is generally words-based, to action-based, because now is the time. And I suppose the other thing that was really quite reassuring was the presence of so many young women at CSW. It was a very obvious presence. So I think the world is still in good hands, and I always have thought that. The number of young women's groups, and Australia was well represented with groups like the Persephone Group, who had 10, I think, members there, really picking up the mantle and making sure that into the future, the women's rights that we've gained over the last century will continue to be either maintained or continue to be enhanced. But it is a really vulnerable time, I think. Cheryl, did you want to add anything there?
Just a couple of things. Firstly, I found when the agreed conclusions usually had a consensus, when there was a pushback against the 12 amendments that this US wanted to have, by actually, for the first time ever, countries having a vote. And so the amendments were pushed down. I thought that was as hope that there was acceptance that gender equality was, with women through all their diversity, needs to be accepted, and not just very, very cut and dried statements of men and women. The Deputy Secretary General, I thought, was really good about leadership when she said leadership is serving populations with diverse leadership. Leadership is an action engine to change, and if you want change, you must do it with women and men together. I loved the debriefings every day with the large Australian contingent, probably about 60 people were there. And that was led by the head of the Office of Women, Padma, and her staff and delegates, particularly Jana, as we recognise today, and Chanel. And that was very important because with the number of parallel events and side events, we couldn't go to there, but people brought back what they had learned and saw today, and they shared, and that sharing was really good. It also cemented the partnerships that we move on with in the women's space in Australia. I went to a Pacific Island caucus meeting, which everyone there signed up to be actually keep together and to have a partnership about what was the priorities living in this part of the world. And I think that's a really important connection. And I also really enjoyed seeing how Zonta presented at many sessions, and that we are, we have a high profile, not only with ourselves, but also the important partnerships we have. So that's my takeaways.
Cheryl, just one thing. I think, Carol, one of the most important things Australia was very well represented, as was Zonta, and Australia was probably one of the most organised groups. Cheryl mentioned the debrief every afternoon. We were all invited to that. We well connected to what was going on in the Australian contingent and the Zonta contingent, and I was proud to be part of both. And I think it was just a wonderful experience.
Brilliant. It's good to hear. Brilliant. Sounds a wonderful experience. That's great. Thank you both. Thank you for sharing. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'll just move on to finish us out. Well, I just want to check the chat line. I don't think we've got anything else there. No, that's good. So there's not too long to go now until the Women Deliver conference in Melbourne. Women Deliver is only held every 3 years, and the last one was held in Rwanda. The speakers list is amazing. And with over 6,000 delegates expected, this will be a global hotspot for gender equality networking. Bridget, Cheryl, Sandra, Lynn Foley, Paddy Creevy and I will be among the Zontians attending. Bridget will be co-hosting an event on child marriage that she mentioned earlier, and we all hope to be at the launch of the new Australian Feminist Climate Collective that's about to hopefully be launched there. And this group consists of many of the allies we worked with in our attempt to host a day at Climate Action Week Sydney earlier in the year. So it'll be great to meet up face to face. Talking about our allies, what are they up to? Well, 1 Million Women is undertaking a survey on making our money count. They're exploring how we can make our money a force for good. And it was great to see that Gender and Disaster Australia, who spoke at our last think tank, is hosting a side event on women's disaster leadership at Women Deliver. The Women's Climate Congress recently held a conversation with Fleur Newman from the Gender Unit at the UNFCCC in Bonn, Jo Crawford from the International Women's Development Agency, and Sally Box, who's Australia's Chief Climate Negotiator. The meeting was recorded, so check it out. Remember, the WCC it's free to join, and they're actually doing a pulse survey at the moment to see how they can best meet their members' needs. WELA, that's the Women's Environmental Leadership Australia, has a masterclass on courageous conversations coming up next week, and that's online, so you can join from anywhere. And finally, in keeping with our theme of flying high, we could not let this meeting go by without mentioning the Artemis 2 flight. It was great to see them land earlier this morning. The crew of this spacecraft has now flown higher than anyone before them. And this short video just captures the excitement.
Yesterday, the crew of Artemis 2 watched as the moon drew closer and then they swung around the far side, being the first humans to see the far side of the moon with their naked eyes in over 54 years. But during the live event, what we got was low-quality images from the engineering cameras and the crew's amazing descriptions. But now we have the first downlinked high-quality images taken with the Nikon cameras. This shows the Earth setting against the limb of the moon. Now, during the Apollo program, when the Earth set, it was setting against the dark side of the moon, so we didn't see this particular image. Of course, on the Apollo missions, we saw the Earthrise photo. The Earth appears larger in this frame because the moon is further away and therefore smaller, whereas the Earth is roughly the same distance. During this, of course, the astronauts set a new record for distance of humans from the Earth, and they are now heading on their way home. During this flypast, the crew also chose to give a crater a name. They named it Carol, after Reed's late wife, Carol Taylor Wiseman, who died back in 2020. It was a poignant moment during this scientific endeavour. Now, of course, as soon as the Earth set, there was no communications with the Earth, and the crew were cut off from mission control. But about 40 minutes later, the Earth would rise again and communications would be restored. Then, sometime after that, the sun set behind the moon, and at that point they were in a special type of eclipse that had never really been observed before. And so from that we have this magnificent image showing the moon against the blackness of space. What we see is the stars around it. We see this glow of the extended solar atmosphere, but also if you look on one side of the moon, you can actually see it is illuminated, and that illumination is not coming from the sun because that's behind it. The illumination is coming from the Earth. This is the moon as illuminated by Earthshine.
So let the Earth shine on you until the next meeting. And on Sunday the 13th, which will be then, our guest speaker may be from the Resilience Canopy, but it's not been confirmed yet. And as I mentioned earlier, this will be the last think tank for the biennium, so it will be an opportunity to celebrate. So please register today. So many thanks today to Kate Thwaites, Sally Quinn, my fellow co-presenters Bernadine Guy, Sue Lees, Sandra Burns, Bridget Mather and Cheryl Scott, and all of you for making today's meeting so interesting. If we've learned one thing today, it's that high flyers still need to have their feet on the ground to be successful. Don't forget that the recording of today's meeting will be uploaded to our website. And before we go, I'll take the screen off share so we can all give each other a wave. And until next time, keep breathing, keep smiling, and have fun. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good to see you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.